Leadership is often painted as a game of strategy. There are plans, forecasts, and bold moves. But beneath all of it lies the human brain, the one tool every leader and team member uses every day, yet really understands deeply. Now, listeners, what happens when uncertainty rattles that brain? When trust is missing? When hidden threats quietly erode culture? Welcome back, listeners, to this episode of the BizBlend podcast. I'm your host, Sana. And for today's episode, we are going deeper with Dr. Sherry Yellin, a pioneer who blends neuroscience and leadership to create cultures people never want to leave. For over 3 decades, she has helped leaders from NASA to Fortune 500 boardrooms learn to stop fighting the brain and start leading with it. So, if you have ever thought about this or wondered what makes people follow some leaders with passion while resisting others with silence, you are in the right place, my friends. So, let's unpack the science of trust, clarity, and resilience, and what every leader needs to know about the brains they lead. So, Sherry, welcome to the show, and I'm really, really amped up for this conversation.
I'm honored, and what a beautiful introduction. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sherry. Okay. So now let's begin with understanding leading in uncertainty. Now, you know, what we are seeing right now, especially the pandemic, post-pandemic, the ever-changing technological, world, the geopolitical tensions, the economic uncertainties. You know, it's kind of, very interesting to see that uncertainty has become the constant in business. Now, from a neuroscience perspective, Dr. Sherry, what happens in the brain when leaders and teams face uncertainty?
Well, we have we've termed this FOBU, FOBU, and that is
Okay.
the fear of being uncertain. And and
Mhm.
it's a fascinating phenomenon because most people at this point have heard something about the prefrontal cortex.
Good.
At its most basic, the prefrontal cortex is what's driving us to be responsible, thinking, thoughtful adults. It's the
Mhm.
part of our brain that allows us to plan and think ahead and have the willpower to execute on those plans, to be able to see from each other's perspectives, which obviously
Mhm.
is important for collaboration and for empathy and really humanity. But what oftentimes people miss is what hijacks that part of the brain. And we know that threat hijacks the prefrontal cortex. So
Mhm.
instead of seeing behaviors such as collaboration, creativity, and innovation, when the
Mhm.
brain's under threat, you start to see defensiveness. People get overly committed to being right. We start looking for an enemy. We begin
Mhm.
incredibly self-protecting, and we get stuck. And the interesting thing about that is not all threat causes that kind of reaction. There is
Mhm.
good threat. Some threat keeps us alive. Like, for example, the threat if I see something coming at me in a dark alley, or, if I'm in the woods and I see a bear coming at me, that
Mhm.
causes my brain to react as it should. And so we're not really talking about what I call motivating threat, but rather demotivating threat. So negative threat. And there are really usually three or four specific criteria that make up negative threat. And one of those is that I don't feel like I have a lot of choice or voice. I don't feel like I have a lot of agency. So, COVID's
Mhm.
probably one of the best examples of a threat that showed up that seem to strip people from their sense of choice or control.
Mm.
A
Mm.
second criteria is that I'm anticipating some kind of negative outcome. So my brain's automatically going to worst case scenario. So COVID, again, it included that, criteria, but a lot of change can do the exact same thing. It, and then the third criteria for negative threat is that there is some element of uncertainty or unknown. And that's where that fear of being uncertain comes in. And when you combine all three of those, when I don't feel like I have a lot of choice or voice, I don't
Mm.
feel like that this is going to end in a positive way, and it's full of uncertainty and confusion. That is the perfect storm to really hijack the prefrontal cortex. So again, the pandemic
Wow.
was just a universal case study of what it looks like long term when people are put in situations where all three of those criteria come together. But that same thing can
Mhm.
happen daily in the workplace.
Right.
It's
Mm.
why the brain really doesn't resist change. In fact, your team probably isn't resisting that change. What they're resisting is the uncertainty or the confusion, the feeling of lack of choice or control, or the anticipation of some kind of negative outcome. And the beauty of that, though, if you recognize it as a leader, if uncertainty and confusion is the problem, then clarity is the solution. And I think that's
Mhm.
one of the primary roles of leadership is to provide clarity. And you may not always have the bigger picture. You don't always
Mhm.
have the clarity, but even providing the next step, even providing enough clarity to move into the next step can be enough to calm the threat and turn back on the prefrontal cortex.
Wow. That is so interesting, Dr. Sherry. So, um, so does that mean, let's say if the brain defaults to survival mode under uncertainty, um, does that mean leaders should actually normalize discomfort instead of, promising stability they can't guarantee?
That's a fabulous question because really what we want to do is build some resilience around uncertainty and the unknown. There's a way to transform that from a negative threat to a challenge. When we
Mhm.
talk about a high trust culture, that doesn't mean it's a soft culture. It doesn't mean you don't push people. It doesn't mean that you don't hold people accountable. In fact, if you're not pushing, you're not challenging, you're not holding people accountable, that too can create a lack of trust and an increase in threat. But what we're talking about is recognizing where there is uncertainty, helping people become more aware of what meaning they're giving that uncertainty, and
Mhm.
helping them build the resilience and really the confidence to navigate that uncertainty. Because when you think about innovation, which is going at a speed that we can barely wrap our heads around, innovation requires going into the unknown. A visionary leader is someone who has learned to be comfortable in the unknown. Another way that we reference our FOBU or FOBU is not
Mhm.
only the fear of being uncertain, but the fear of being uncomfortable. And so just even being able to label it as such,
Mhm.
recognizing that it's not the change that's causing us to, get rattled, or it's not the change that's causing us to resist. What's causing us to resist is the uncertainty or being uncomfortable. So just even being able to label it as such allows you then to recognize it and adopt some better strategies on how to navigate it so that what we're building are individuals and teams and organizations and ideally the whole world that we become more comfortable in operating in uncertainty and the unknown. We've almost built a muscle for doing that. And just like going to a gym, I can't
Mm-hmm.
watch you do reps and, enjoy the benefits of what comes out of that. I've got to do that. But you're not going to start me doing those reps at 150 pounds. For me, I'm probably starting my reps at 15 pounds. And you
Mm-hmm.
build that muscle. And by building that, you're building the confidence that allows that individual or that team or that organization to really be able to create a safe space where there is innovation. People can take risks, they can go into the unknown because they have the confidence to support it.
Mm-hmm. I really love that. Love that approach because many leaders they feel pressured to project certainty. Like saying that everything is going to be fine, everything is going to be okay. No need to be fearful of this change. But what I now understand after what you said is that guiding the brain through uncertainty it may actually be more honest, and perhaps it can be more powerful than just pretending to eliminate it. It's like embracing, not to eliminate it.
Actually, you're spot on, and a great practical action for leaders is if you are leading a change, you do have to introduce a change, or which might be something as simple as a policy change, or it might
Hmm.
be a software change, it might be a change in the organizational structure. We could go on and on. But a great strategy with your team is when you've introduced that, immediately start talking about what did that just mean to you and what are all the uncertainties that are coming up for you right now. So being able to even start vocalizing that as a team is a way to start to actually mitigate any kind of negative consequence of it. And I tell you, you can use that individually as well. Oftentimes, procrastination is
Hmm.
nothing more than a lack of clarity. It's just uncertainty. I think we've
Hmm.
all been in those projects where we're procrastinating, but if we were really honest, we're procrastinating because we weren't clear on either what winning would look like with that, or we aren't clear on what our next steps are. So you can use that individually as well. Next time you find yourself maybe procrastinating, or you find yourself even in the midst of overwhelm and anxiety, get a piece of paper, start writing down what are all of the uncertainties that are coming up for me. Or maybe
Hmm.
a better question is, where am I lacking clarity? Clarity really is like a breath of fresh air, and it's motivating because if I can gain clarity, even enough clarity for the next step, I'm back in motion. And a second question after I've listed where am I needing clarity, a great second question is, and where can I go get it? Because that is giving you the sense of control and agency that you need. That's also an element of negative threat.
Yeah.
So it's easily, well, I say easily, there are certain degrees of uncertainty that can rattle us more than others. But the good news, I think, in all of it is that we don't have to create more resistance. We don't have to stay in overwhelm. We don't have to procrastinate on something which is actually causing our stress to get higher. And therefore, it's becoming even harder to start on a project. The good news is recognizing this is how my brain responds to uncertainty. "Oh, there you are again, uncertainty," "There you are again, unknown." But I have a couple of strategies that I can use to move through it.
Mm, yeah, I think that's a very good way to kind of being confrontational and very intentional. And I think it's a very good news because it has happened with every one of us, I believe.
Yes.
Whenever we don't have any clarity on, you know, what to study, okay, what exactly will I be asked, or what exactly the interview is going to be about. I'm kind of procrastinating. I don't want to touch this. I'll do it later. Let me do something else which I like. Then I'll jump onto this. So yeah, that's very
It is
true.
really great to think about trying a new exercise. The next time we're feeling overwhelmed or we're feeling anxiety, if we can remember to pause and think, this is just your brain's natural reaction to uncertainty. Oh, hey,
Mm,
that means my brain is working exactly the way it should. This
yeah.
is the way the brain works. It's going to pause or balk or resist to some degree to any uncertainty that comes into my life. To be able to reframe that as a healthy thing, that's a healthy mind that does that. So I recognize it faster that it isn't the news that I just got. It isn't the change that was just announced. It isn't this new season of life necessarily that I'm moving into that's causing me to feel this way. It's my brain's need for clarity. It's the uncertainty.
Mm.
So being able to then, look at the monster under the bed and realize if we can just start identifying what are those areas where I'm uncertain. And many of those, just even recognizing that alone can make a big difference. But oftentimes, when you start generating that list, then you start generating ways that you can go grab the clarity that you need or ask for help from someone who maybe has been there. And that gets us on the right track. And so, when the next time your team maybe is, seems to you that they're stalling or they're resisting, as the leader, recognizing their brains are just doing exactly what it's wired to do. It isn't that they're working against you or trying to sabotage you or make life harder. They're just telling you, I need clarity. And so as a leader, it gives you a really good opportunity to guide them through that. And on the other side of it, which is the ultimate win for a leader, is that you're growing a stronger, healthier team.
Mm, absolutely. Absolutely. And Dr. Sherry, you also talk about the top 10 threats in the workplace. So can you share which ones show up most often and why leaders often miss them?
Yes. And if you will, as a leader, even if you can start listening to some of the language when the brain is under threat, you start to hear language such as
Mhm.
either or. Either I stay in this
Yeah.
job or I leave. You start hearing
Yeah.
things like, "I don't know," when you ask people the question. Those are all threat responses. Well, a little more information. So change definitely makes the top 10 list. We can check that one off. But
Yeah.
the interesting thing with your brain is your brain doesn't care if the threat is physical, emotional, or psychological. So, really important that we're recognizing that your brain's going to react to any kind of threat the same way. It really doesn't care where the threat is generated. And the other thing that I find fascinating is your brain doesn't care if the threat is past, present, or future. It can
Right.
experience the
Yeah.
threat in the moment. We've all had those moments where you're worried about something and you feel it in the moment, though it's never happened, or you can relive it from the past. And sometimes that just shows up as a bias. But the third point around threat that's so important to remember is your brain doesn't care if it's real or perceived.
Perceived, yeah.
So, a few of the threats that are usually perceived, but sometimes they're real, one of those would be favoritism. So let's say
Mm,
you've, applied for a a promotion and your colleague gets it and you don't. If I perceive that as favoritism, that's definitely a threat to my brain, and then you'll start to see all the threat responses. But the one that fascinates me the most is the one that I would say is the number one threat, and that is social rejection. We know that brain scans of physical pain and brain scans of social rejection are
mm,
virtually identical. So, this idea of creating a sense of belonging, of
mm,
eliminating silos and having cultures that are collaborative, where people feel welcome, where they at times, feel like they are part of a community.
mm.
It's not just touchy-feely, happy-clappy. There's a science behind it, and so you can imagine when someone's in a work environment where there are silos, where there isn't a sense of belonging,
Mm.
that's a negative threat to the brain. And then the third one that really stands out to me on this list is not feeling like my work has a meaningful purpose. Our brains are so
Yeah, yeah.
purpose driven. And some of the interesting thing that we've discovered because we work in a lot of different industries, because
Mhm,
every industry is still working with this 3-pound universe. And so the problems, though they may look and sound a little differently, they're at the root really all the same. And when you
mm,
think about meaningful purpose, you would, at least I thought going into the work that I do, that places like nonprofits or healthcare systems wouldn't suffer from that because it should be obvious to them what an important noble purpose they serve. Actually, those industries tend to suffer the most because sometimes their noble cause or their noble purpose is actually used against their employees. For example, you shouldn't complain about working all these hours
mhm,
because of the patients that you serve. Or
mm,
in nonprofit, of course, we have to run lean and take on you all the stress of multiple projects because we're here to serve the community. And
mhm,
so it's important that if you're in those roles, that that purpose becomes something that's meaningful to the brain and motivating to people. It's not used as something to use against them, to make them
mhm,
feel less than or guilty of
mm.
'cause they need vacations just like everyone else.
Yeah, obvious. It's obvious. Um, uh, and um, I think this really uh kind of gives us that reminder that so many leaders, they focus only on the loud problems, like turnover or conflict, which is very, very much popularly discussed when it comes to culture or workplace. Why? Kind of missing the subtle brain based signals that actually caused them. So it's more towards preventing than to reacting. So I think that's
It
a
really is. It's
Mhm.
calling for a belief change. It's
Exactly.
recognizing that it's a change of belief from we may be investing millions of dollars in technology or we're investing millions of dollars in equipment, but we cut our
Mhm.
people development budget. And it really requires a shift in belief that we can work with how the brain works best and we can provide cultures where the brain will operate the best and we can get better results with less effort, or we continue in many ways to be brain antagonistic and actually cause the pain or cause the problem that we're probably complaining about.
Mm. Yeah.
And most of the leaders that I've worked with, through the years, which is why we do the work together,
Mhm.
they know more about their technology. They know more about how their phone and computer work than
Yeah.
how their brains work, much
Brain works.
less
Yeah.
how to lead a team of brains.
Yeah. That
And
kind
so
of a
while we
mm.
still have a long way to go in understanding not only how the brain learns, but then also how do you apply that in practical, meaningful ways, though we have a long way to go, let's start applying what we already know and see how it makes a difference.
Yeah. And this really, really, it's a, such a powerful, kind of rebuttal. If anybody would ask, why would I need to understand how my brain works, or why would I need to understand how my team members brains work? If I want to lead them, I would just give them orders and do a clear cut communication that this is how you work and this is where you're working, you're getting your salary, so you have to do it. I
Yes,
think
it does make a difference when you're able to explain the why behind the how. And so when you are helping develop people and you're asking them to carry on a conversation in a certain way or lead a change process in a certain way, it's
we.
often really helpful to be able to understand the why behind those strategies.
Hmm. And on this, before we wrap up, one final question, Dr. Sherry. No, it is connected to what I just said. Now, how do you ever encounter critique that brain science is more fluff than function? I mean, do you get any kind of skepticism around this from the leaders?
That's a great observation because we also do a lot of coaching, executive leadership coaching. And the word coach is one of those words that's been thrown around. Everybody's a coach now, so it kind
Yeah.
of lost its power in some ways. I wish we had a different word for it. Haven't figured one out yet. But you're right. We have to be in integrity in how we're using what's being discovered in neuroscience and how it translates.
Mhm.
Because, a lot of words around mindset and uh, are used where it's not connected to science. And so
Yeah.
being able to really connect it back to solid research, not just necessarily something that a person read off Google, or being able to actually show brain imaging. And that's been the biggest game changer is being able to actually show this is what your brain looks like on trust, and this is
Mhm.
what it looks like on threat. And we actually show those images when we are working with leaders for them to see that it makes a physiological difference. And not only that, but also a difference in the chemicals in your brain. So being able to show it and talk about it and then connect it with good solid research is very important.
Of course. Of course. Great, great. So, Dr. Sherry, if our listeners they would like to connect with you for all the resources that you're sharing, what would be the easiest way?
We are at yellingroup.com, YELLIN group.com. And I can also share with you just a really easy read ebook over those top 10 threats
Mhm.
with some practical tips on how to do that. And I'd love that. I'd love to share that with your readers, listeners.
Wonderful, wonderful. That is really, really generous and very, very helpful. to begin with, Dr. Sherry, and I'll make sure to have all the links in the show notes. And I must really thank you for reminding us today that um, leading with the brain instead of fighting it can transform workplaces from places people leave, into cultures that people may really never would like to leave or walk away from. Of course, we have talked about leading with heart, but I think brain has also got its own important role to perform in there. So thank you so much, Dr. Sherry, for shining light on this.
Well, thank you for this podcast and the work that you're doing in the world. It's very important. And you're right. When you think about
Okay, thank you.
we can spend almost 90,000 or 100,000 hours of our life at work, it's worth creating a culture where people can be their best.
Exactly, exactly.
Thank
And to all the listeners out there, this is what I would say. Leadership isn't about just strategy, metrics, or the quarterly reports or the results. It's about brains, the human brain, with all its fears, hopes, and patterns, is the one constant every leader must understand. So, if you are a leader listening right now, here's the challenge: stop trying to bend the brain to your leadership. Instead, bend your leadership to the brain. That's where resilience, innovation, and trust live. So, thank you to all of you for tuning us to BizBlend. Until next time, keep blending science with humanity in the way you lead. Thank you.